When did you overhear someone talking about you in a language they didn't think you understood? When I met my girlfriend Ariana, the first thing she asked was if I spoke Italian. I wanted to be smooth and answered, yes, I can in Italian. But I guess nerves got to me because I somehow fumbled the words. I thought I blew it until she started laughing. Thank God. I can't date Italians anymore. My ex used to eavesdrop on every private family conversation, then bring it up unprompted. I smiled. Good thing I don't know Italian, then smoothly diverted the conversation away from Italy. By the end of that evening, I'd fallen way too hard to tell her I was fluent, and figured I'd just cross that bridge when I got to it. But then my first family dinner happened. Her mother looked me up and down and said in Italian, "So this is him, huh? Does he even have a job?" Her father responded, "Marketing? My nephew's 16 and could do that." Ariana whispered something back to them and they all chuckled. "They're saying how wonderful it is to meet you," she translated, squeezing my hand. Her parents smiled with zero warmth. For 2 years, her parents ripped into me. They'd comment in Italian about my hobbies. Grown man watching superhero movies. My future with Ariana. You're really wasting your life on this loser. Even my upbringing. Were his parents circus clowns or something? Each time, Ariana would lean in and mutter something to them quietly. Sometimes she'd stifle a laugh or make a, "What can you do?" face. The worst part was the comparison game. Remember when Marco, her ex, brought those expensive wines? Marco's family had that house in Tuscany. At least Marco could grow a proper beard. After each mention, Ariana would say something to them super quietly, and they'd all glance at me with what looked like pity. I was struggling really hard not to blow my cover already, and then Ariana found my old Italian notebook while searching for her passport. I'd forgotten it existed, but it contained hundreds of pages of evidence I'd learned the language. "What's this?" she asked that evening, her face pale like she was scared I understood every word all along. "It was my brother Jack's," I answered before I could even think. "He loved Italian culture before he died." She looked down, afraid of pressing my obvious lie. "But Jack died when he was 6, she muttered. I froze, realizing she was onto me. Jack was advanced for his age. Her eyes narrowed, but she just hugged me and walked away. I looked up at the sky and dapped my little brother up, thinking we got away with it. Unfortunately, we did not. Soon, Ariana started testing me, casually playing Italian music while cooking, watching my face for recognition of the words. She began mentioning Italian movies. "Have you heard of Cinema Paradiso?" Studying my blank expression for cracks. She even asked me to pronounce menu items at restaurants, analyzing whether my butchered attempts seemed genuine. The thought of me knowing the truth drove her crazy. She escalated her investigation through careful observation. She found that my phone's keyboard had Italian in the language settings. My phone came like that. I never deleted it, I explained. But then she discovered I'd watched The Godfather with Italian subtitles. I was trying to read them like the credits, thought it would be authentic. I laughed. She checked my Spotify, no Italian songs, but the algorithm suggested Italian playlists. It knows I like pasta restaurants, I joked. She wasn't laughing. The tests grew smarter. She'd mix Italian words into English sentences, watching for recognition. She found a receipt from an Italian bookstore. "That bookstore also sells coffee. I met a client there," I said. My college transcripts showed I'd taken Spanish, but she found Italian conjugations in my old notebook margins. Study buddy was Italian. He'd doodle while we studied. Then came the most suspicious evidence. My laptop's autocomplete. When she typed come, it suggested sty. I looked genuinely puzzled. "Maybe from that time you used my laptop for your parents' emails?" She knew she'd never done that, but couldn't prove it. My YouTube history had gaps, but I always cleared history periodically anyway. The investigation reached its peak while traveling across the country to meet my parents for the first time. During the drive, she tested me one last time. "If you understood Italian, would you tell me?" Of course. My mom greeted us warmly the second we got there. Everything was going great until dessert, when Ariana mentioned wishing I could understand her family better. "Oh, but he should," Mom said brightly. "He spent entire summers with his grandmother." "In England," Dad interrupted desperately. "In London, hanging out with his English cousins." Mom froze mid-sentence, her spoon hovering over her tiramisu. Of course it was in England. The blood drained from Ariana's face. She looked at me, then at my parents, trying to study all of us. Not another word was said about it, but the drive home was silent. Ariana stared out the window, undoubtedly replaying 2 years of family dinners. Every cruel comment, every whispered response, every laugh at my expense. She knew I knew her family made me their personal joke while she joined in. And she knew I'd started our entire relationship with a lie. We slept separately that night, and when I woke up in the morning, she was in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. "Dobbiamo parlare. We need to talk." What she told me changed the rest of my life forever. She set down her coffee cup on the counter with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. Her hands were shaking just enough to make the remaining coffee ripple against the sides of the mug. "Do you speak Italian?" she asked, her voice steady even though everything else about her seemed ready to fall apart. The question hung between us for what felt like forever, but was probably only a second or two. I could see in her eyes that she already knew the answer, had known since my parents' house when Mom almost blew my cover completely. She needed to hear me say it though, needed me to finally tell her the truth after 2 years of lies. I took a deep breath that felt like it went all the way down to my toes. "Yes," I said, the word coming out quieter than I meant it to. "I'm fluent. Have been since I was a kid." The admission felt like pulling a splinter out that had been stuck under my skin for years. Painful, but necessary. Her face didn't change much, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. She nodded slowly, processing what I'd just confirmed even though she'd already figured it out. Her eyes showed everything she was feeling all at once. Hurt and anger, and something that looked like grief for what she thought we had. She opened her mouth to say something, closed it, then opened it again. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out fast like she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. The kitchen suddenly felt too small and too quiet at the same time. My brain tried to process both things at once. The fact that she knew I'd been lying and the fact that we were going to have a baby. Neither of us moved for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. The coffee maker beeped to indicate it was done brewing, but neither of us got up to turn it off. We just sat there at our small kitchen table, the weight of everything pressing down on us. The lies, the pregnancy, the broken trust, all of it just sitting there between us like a wall we'd have to figure out how to climb over or knock down. She rubbed her face with both hands, and I noticed her nail polish was chipped, something she never would have let happen before all this started. "We need time to think," she said through her hands. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, we do." We spent the rest of the morning moving around each other carefully, like we were both made of glass that might shatter if we bumped into each other. She went to take a shower and I cleaned up the kitchen, washing her coffee cup 3 times because I wasn't really paying attention. When evening came around, we ended up back in the kitchen because neither of us knew where else to go. I finally told her about all the times her parents had insulted me while she translated translated their words into compliments. Your mom called me a loser at least 50 times, I said, watching her face carefully. Your dad said I was worthless, that you were wasting your life on me. Her eyes went wide and she actually looked shocked, like she'd never thought about what those fake translations meant to me. I didn't. I mean, I knew what they were saying, but I thought if you didn't understand, it wouldn't hurt you. The logic of it made me want to laugh, but nothing about this was funny. She looked down at her hands folded on the table. Sometimes I laughed along with them, she admitted, her voice getting smaller. It was easier than fighting with them all the time. They're my parents, and I wanted them to like you, but they wouldn't give you a chance, so I just went along with it. The honesty stung, but I was glad she was finally telling me the truth about something. We sat there for a while longer before deciding we needed 2 weeks to figure out what we wanted to do. About us, and about the baby, she clarified, like I might have forgotten about either thing. Neither of us knew if we could fix what was broken between us, but we had to try to figure it out now that there was going to be a kid involved. That night, we went through our regular routine like robots programmed to brush teeth and wash faces. We stood side by side at the bathroom sink, but it felt like we were in different rooms entirely. She took the bedroom and I took the couch again, the leather cold against my skin through my t-shirt. I could hear her moving around in the bedroom, probably not sleeping either. The apartment felt too quiet and too loud at the same time, every little sound seeming bigger in the darkness. So he's been pretending not to understand Italian for 2 whole years while her parents trash-talked him right to his face? That's quite a commitment to a lie, but I wonder what made him think this was better than just coming clean early on. The next morning I got up before she did and found a notebook in the desk drawer. I started writing down every single time I'd hidden my Italian knowledge from her, the time she'd asked me to order at that restaurant and I'd pointed at the menu instead, the time her mom had called me an idiot right to my face and I'd smiled and nodded, the time her dad had told her in Italian that she could do so much better and I'd pretended to be checking my phone. Page after page filled up with my deceptions, each one seeming smaller and stupider than the last. By the time I was done, I had 12 pages of lies written out in my messy handwriting. Seeing it all there in black and white made me realize just how many chances I'd had to come clean and how I'd blown every single one of them. That evening, Ariana came into the living room with her own notebook and sat down across from me on the coffee table. She'd been writing for hours in the bedroom, and her hand had ink smudges all over it. She pushed the notebook toward me, and I saw she'd filled 8 pages with tiny, neat handwriting. Every single time she'd chosen to laugh along instead of defending me. Every dinner where she'd let them compare me to Marco without saying anything. Every translated lie she'd told to spare my feelings while letting them tear me apart. The time her mom called me pathetic, and she'd just shrugged. The time her dad said I dressed like a teenager, and she'd agreed with him quietly. All those moments where she could have stood up for me but picked the easy path instead. We both stared at our notebooks like they were evidence in a crime scene. Neither of us had realized how bad it had gotten until we saw it all written out. She reached over and squeezed my hand for a second before pulling back. We needed to tell our parents about the pregnancy, but neither of us could face doing it together right now. She said she'd call hers tomorrow and I'd call mine. The thought of those conversations made my stomach hurt, but we couldn't put them off any longer. I called my parents the next afternoon while Ariana was at work. My mom answered on the second ring all cheerful until she heard my voice. I told them everything about the pregnancy and how my lie had wrecked everything with Ariana. Dad stayed quiet while Mom kept asking questions about due dates and doctor appointments. When I explained how bad things were between us, she started crying. Dad finally spoke up and said they were disappointed in me for lying, but they'd support whatever we decided. Mom apologized 3 more times for almost blowing my cover at dinner. She kept saying she should have known better. I could hear her beating herself up about it through the phone. By Friday, our first prenatal appointment had arrived, and we drove to the clinic in complete silence. The waiting room was full of happy couples holding hands and rubbing bellies. We sat 2 chairs apart pretending to read magazines. When the nurse called us back, we walked down the hallway like strangers who happened to be going the same direction. She did all the basic checks and measurements while we answered questions about family medical history. Then the doctor came in with the ultrasound machine and squeezed gel on Ariana's stomach. The room went dark except for the monitor. At first it was just static and weird shadows moving around. Then we heard it, that fast whooshing sound like a tiny train racing through a tunnel, the heartbeat. Ariana grabbed my hand without thinking, and we both started crying. Everything else was falling apart, but that little heartbeat was real and strong, and ours. The doctor printed out pictures and we each took copies. Walking back to the car, we didn't talk, but we weren't as far apart as before. That weekend I knew I couldn't put it off anymore. I called Ariana's parents while she sat next to me on the couch. Her dad answered and I started speaking in perfect Italian before he could say hello. I told him I'd understood every single word they'd said about me for 2 years. Every insult and joke and comparison to Marco. The line went completely silent. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't say anything for almost 30 seconds. Then, her mom grabbed the phone and started firing questions at me in rapid Italian. How long had I known the language? Why did I lie? What kind of person does something like that? Ariana sat frozen between us, not knowing whose side to take. Her mom demanded we come to dinner immediately to discuss this. I said we'd come, but things were going to be different from now on. She laughed bitterly and said we'd see about that. After I hung up Ariana and I got into our first real fight about the dinner, she wanted to do all the talking to protect me from their anger. She knew how vicious they could be when they felt betrayed. I told her absolutely not. I'd been silent for 2 years, and I was going to speak for myself this time. She kept insisting they'd listen to her better. I said that was the whole problem. She'd been managing them instead of standing up to them our entire relationship. We went back and forth for an hour, getting louder and more frustrated. Finally, we agreed I'd lead, but she'd jump in if things got too heated. Neither of us felt good about the compromise. The dinner was 3 days later, and my hands were shaking as we walked up to their door. Her mom answered without saying hello and led us to the dining room. Her dad was already sitting at the table with his arms crossed. I sat down and started speaking in Italian immediately. I told them the mockery stopped now. No more comparing me to ex-boyfriends. No more insulting my job or my family or my interests. If they wanted to be in their grandchild's life, they needed to treat me with basic respect. Her mother tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I said I took responsibility for lying, but their cruelty was inexcusable. Ariana's voice shook, but she backed me up. She told them she was tired of being stuck in the middle. She wanted them to accept me, or at least stop actively undermining our relationship. Her dad finally spoke and said we'd humiliated them by keeping this secret. Her mom added that trust was earned, not demanded. The conversation went in circles for 2 hours. Finally, we left with nothing resolved except an agreement to try family counseling. In the car afterward, we sat in the driveway, not ready to go home yet. We started listing all the specific ways we'd hurt each other, the lies I'd told, the times she'd laughed at their jokes. The moments we'd each chosen the easy path over honesty. Every betrayal and disappointment came pouring out. We both ended up sobbing in that dark car. Not just for what we'd done, but for what we'd lost. The relationship we thought we had was gone, and we didn't know if we could build something new. When we finally went inside, Ariana said she needed space to think. She wanted to stay with her parents for a few nights. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but I helped her pack a bag anyway. We moved around each other so carefully like we might break if we bumped into each other. I carried her suitcase to her car and watched her drive away. The apartment felt empty and too quiet without her. I tried to focus on work but couldn't concentrate on anything. The presentation I was supposed to finish sat open on my laptop screen, but I just stared at it. The deadline came and went, and I didn't submit anything. Monday morning, my supervisor sent an email asking to meet about my performance. Another problem to add to the pile that kept growing higher every day. That meeting with my supervisor went about as bad as expected. She pulled up my recent performance metrics on her screen and pointed at all the red marks showing missed deadlines and incomplete projects. My hands were shaking as I tried to explain without giving too much personal detail. She put me on a formal improvement plan with weekly check-ins starting immediately. I nodded and signed the paperwork, knowing I had no choice if I wanted to keep my job. When I got home that afternoon, I sat at my laptop and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at me for 20 minutes before I started typing in Italian. Every word felt strange after hiding the language for so long. I wrote about meeting Ariana and how one small lie turned into 2 years of deception. I explained listening to her parents mock me while she translated lies. I admitted my own cowardice in not speaking up sooner. The letter grew to 3 pages as I typed everything I'd wanted to say for months. I described the hurt of being compared to Marco constantly. I wrote about watching Ariana laugh along with their jokes. I acknowledged my fault in starting everything with a lie, but said their cruelty wasn't justified. My fingers moved faster as the Italian flowed more naturally. Writing in the language felt like taking off a heavy coat I'd worn too long. I saved the document and texted Ariana that I'd written something for her parents. She came over the next morning carrying coffee and looking tired. I showed her the letter on my laptop, and she sat down to read it slowly. Her face changed as she went through each paragraph. She pointed at one section and suggested softer wording. I changed it, and she nodded. We spent 2 hours going back and forth on different phrases. She helped me explain my perspective without attacking them directly. I adjusted parts that sounded too angry. She fixed my grammar in places where my Italian was rusty. We worked together better than we had in weeks. When we finished, we had a letter that said everything important without being cruel. She printed it out, and we both signed our names at the bottom. That afternoon, my parents drove over to talk about everything. Mom brought homemade soup like that would fix our problems. Dad sat on the couch looking uncomfortable but determined to help. They asked what we needed from them financially and emotionally. Her parents just happened to have 8 pages of insults ready to match his 12 pages of lies. Something about these perfectly balanced notebooks feels too neat for real-life messy relationships. Mom told us about their first year of marriage when Dad lost his job and they almost divorced. Dad talked about how they learned to communicate better through counseling. They said every relationship faces huge tests and what matters is choosing to work through them. Mom held my hand and said they'd support whatever we decided. Dad added they'd love their grandchild no matter what happened between Ariana and me. They stayed for 3 hours sharing advice and just listening to us talk. After they left, Ariana set up her laptop for a video call with her parents. I sat beside her as the call connected and her parents appeared on screen. She took a deep breath and told them she was pregnant. Her mother's eyes went wide and she immediately started talking about baby names and nursery colors. Her father interrupted with questions about our financial stability and living situation. Ariana answered calmly while I sat there understanding every word but staying quiet. Her mother asked if we were getting married and Ariana said we were figuring things out. Her father's face got tight when he realized things weren't solid between us. The call lasted an hour with her parents switching between excitement and concern. After we hung up, Ariana looked exhausted from managing their reactions. She went to her parents' house for dinner that night while I stayed home. Around 11, my phone rang, and it was Ariana crying. She said her parents spent the whole dinner telling her she was making a mistake staying with me. They brought up Marco again, and how he would have proposed immediately. Her mom said the baby deserved parents who were stable and committed. Her dad questioned if I'd even stick around once things got hard. Ariana was sobbing so hard, I could barely understand her words. She said she knew they were wrong, but their doubt was getting to her. She didn't know how to make them understand we were trying our best. I told her to come home and we'd figure it out together. The next morning, her father texted asking to meet me alone. We agreed on a coffee shop downtown that afternoon. I got there first and picked a corner table away from other people. He showed up 5 minutes late looking serious. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me without shaking hands. He started talking in Italian about his fears for his daughter. He said he'd worked his whole life to give her opportunities. He didn't want her settling for someone who couldn't provide properly. He admitted the comparisons to Marco were unfair, but came from wanting the best for her. He said fathers never think anyone is good enough for their daughters. I listened without interrupting, even though parts made me angry. When he finished, I responded in Italian explaining my own position. I told him I loved Ariana despite our current problems. I said I'd never abandon my child regardless of what happened between us. He nodded slowly and seemed surprised by my fluency and directness. We talked for another hour, finding small points of agreement. That evening, Ariana brought up all the tests she'd put me through trying to catch me understanding Italian. She counted at least 30 different attempts to expose my secret. She said she felt crazy constantly looking for proof of betrayal. She realized she'd been so focused on catching me lying, she forgot to actually build trust. Her voice cracked when she admitted she'd become paranoid and suspicious. She said it exhausted her, always analyzing my reactions to everything. I told her I understood why she'd tested me given the circumstances. We both acknowledged how much energy we'd wasted on deception and suspicion. 3 days later, we had our first counseling appointment with someone specializing in couples therapy. The therapist's office had 2 chairs facing each other with her seat off to the side. She asked us to describe our main issues without interrupting each other. Ariana went first, explaining the betrayal she felt about my lie. I talked about the hurt from her family's mockery and her participation. The therapist took notes and asked follow-up questions about our patterns. She pointed out how we both chose avoiding conflict over honest communication. She gave us homework to practice stating our needs directly without accusations. We scheduled weekly sessions and left with communication guidelines to follow. The next day, I met with my supervisor again about adjusting my schedule. I explained I needed flexibility for medical appointments without giving specifics. She reviewed the company policy on family leave and flexible arrangements. She agreed to let me work from home 2 days a week, but she also made it clear I was on thin ice with the performance plan. Any more missed deadlines would lead to termination regardless of personal circumstances. I signed the new arrangement feeling grateful, but stressed about juggling everything. That weekend, Ariana suggested we should plan for the worst-case scenario. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing headers for custody and finances. We spent 4 hours creating a document neither of us wanted to use. We discussed who would have the baby on which days if we separated. We calculated child support based on our current salaries. We wrote down decisions about medical care and education. Every sentence felt like accepting failure, but we kept going. We agreed on splitting holidays and birthdays if necessary. We decided on communication methods for co-parenting logistics. By the time we finished, we were both drained from imagining that future. We put the document in a folder, hoping we'd never need to open it again. 3 days later, we drove to the hospital for the 12-week ultrasound appointment. The waiting room was packed with happy couples holding hands, while we sat with space between us on the plastic chairs. When they called our names, we walked down the hallway without touching, both staring at the floor tiles. The technician squeezed cold gel on Ariana's stomach and started moving the wand around while we watched the black and white screen. Then suddenly there it was, this tiny person doing flips and moving their arms like they were dancing. The technician pointed out the heartbeat, the spine, the little fingers opening and closing. Without thinking, I reached for Ariana's hand and she grabbed mine back tight. We both had tears running down our faces watching our baby move around like that. The technician printed out pictures, and we walked to the car still holding hands, the first time we'd touched in weeks. Neither of us said anything about it, but we didn't let go until we got to the parking lot. The next weekend, we decided to try lunch with her parents at this Italian place downtown. We'd agreed on a new rule before going. No mockery in any language, period. Her mom started right away when we sat down, looking at the menu and saying in Italian how marketing people just make up lies for a living. I responded immediately in perfect Italian that I'd appreciate her keeping her opinions about my career to herself. Her face went white and she dropped her menu. Her dad started to say something, but Ariana cut him off saying we'd leave if they couldn't be respectful. The waiter came over and we ordered in this weird, tense silence. Her mom tried again halfway through the meal, mentioning in Italian how my parents seemed simple when she'd seen their Facebook photos. I put down my fork and stood up. Ariana stood up too and said we were leaving right now. Her mom started protesting, but Ariana was already putting on her coat. We left cash on the table and walked out while her parents sat there stunned. In the car, Ariana's hands were shaking as she started the engine. She'd never stood up to them like that before, and I could see how much it cost her. That evening, we started what became our new routine, taking walks around the neighborhood after dinner. We'd leave our phones at home and just walk for an hour, using the movement to help us talk without having to look at each other. The first few walks were mostly quiet, but gradually we started opening up. During the fourth walk, I admitted I'd vented to my college buddy about our problems over beers last month. She told me she'd cried to her sister on the phone about whether she could trust me again. I confessed I'd looked at apartment listings online after really bad fights. She said she'd packed a bag twice but never actually left. We kept walking and listing all these small betrayals we'd kept secret. Each confession hurt to hear, but also felt like cleaning out an infected wound. We passed the same houses and the same dogs barking behind fences while we laid everything out there. By the time we got home, we were both exhausted, but the air felt clearer between us. Monday morning, I got called into my supervisor's office for my performance review. She had spreadsheets showing all my missed deadlines from the past month and client complaints about delayed responses. My numbers were way below target, and I'd missed 2 important presentations. She said she understood I had personal issues, but the company needed me functioning at full capacity. She put me on a formal performance improvement plan with weekly check-ins and specific targets to hit. If I didn't meet them within 60 days, they'd have to let me go. I signed the paperwork knowing I deserved it after how distracted I'd been. Walking back to my desk felt like everyone was watching me, knowing I was hanging by a thread. That night, Ariana's mom created a family group text and added me without asking. She wrote in Italian about planning a big family reunion next month. I responded naturally in Italian for the first time, saying we wouldn't be able to make it. Her dad jumped in asking why not, and I explained we needed space to focus on ourselves. Her cousin started typing and her uncle added his opinion. The whole family was suddenly discussing our relationship in this group text. Funny how her mom thinks she's being sneaky, creating that family group text and writing in Italian, not knowing he can read every word she types. Wonder if she's testing him or just hasn't caught on yet that her secret weapon is useless now. Ariana grabbed my phone and typed that this was exactly why we needed boundaries. Her mom called immediately, but we didn't answer. The texts kept coming all evening until we muted the conversation. 2 days later, Ariana asked me something unexpected while we were making dinner. She wanted me to translate her parents' conversation in real time the next time we saw them, so she could hear what I'd been hearing. That Sunday, we went to their house for coffee, and her parents started talking in Italian about how thin I looked. I translated word for word what they were saying. Her mom said I probably couldn't afford food on my salary. I translated that too. Her dad mentioned how at least Marco had muscle definition. I kept translating everything while Ariana's face got paler. They complained about my posture, my clothes, even the way I held my coffee cup. Every word got translated until Ariana finally told them to stop. She was crying by the time we left, finally understanding what I'd sat through for 2 years. In the car, she kept apologizing, saying she had no idea they were that cruel with their exact words. That night during our walk, she explained something I hadn't understood before. She'd learned as a kid to use humor to deflect their criticism, laughing along so it wouldn't hurt as much. When they'd mock her grades or her friends, she'd make it a joke before they could make it painful. It became automatic, this survival mechanism she didn't even realize she was using. When they mocked me and she laughed, she wasn't trying to be cruel. She was just reverting to her childhood pattern. I started seeing those moments differently, not as her joining them against me, but as her trying to survive them the only way she knew how. We decided that night to skip all family events for a month to focus on just us. Both sets of parents protested immediately when we told them. My mom called 3 times saying she wanted to help with baby preparation. Her parents sent long guilt trip texts about family being everything. We held firm, saying we needed space to work on our relationship without outside pressure. Her mom showed up at our apartment uninvited, but we didn't answer the door. My dad sent emails about how we were making a mistake. We stuck to our decision, even though it felt like we were letting everyone down. The next morning, we sat at the kitchen table with our laptops open to bank statements and rental websites. Ariana had already made a spreadsheet with columns for baby costs, my income, her income, and what 2 apartments would cost. The numbers didn't work no matter how we moved them around. She kept typing different scenarios while I searched for cheaper places near each other. We'd need cribs in both places, car seats, double everything basically. After 2 hours, we closed the laptops without deciding anything because the math made us both feel sick. 3 days later, Ariana drove to her parents' house to get some of her old baby stuff from the attic. I stayed home because we agreed it was better if she went alone. She texted me an hour later that her mom was following her around, asking questions about why we needed space. Then the texts stopped for 3 hours. When she finally came home, her eyes were red, and she dropped a box of baby clothes on the floor. Her mom had accused her of choosing me over family, of being ungrateful, of not understanding how much they'd done for her. Ariana had finally told her mom to stop treating her like a child. They'd screamed at each other in the driveway while the neighbors watched. Her dad had to come outside to calm them down. She was shaking when she told me, but also seemed taller somehow, like standing up to them had changed her posture. That weekend, while we were cleaning the nursery, I stopped and looked at her. I told her I needed to apologize for something that had been eating at me. Using Jack's death to cover my lie was the worst thing I'd done in all of this. My little brother died when he was 6, and I'd used his memory to protect myself from getting caught. She deserved better than someone who would do that. Ariana put down the paint roller and came over to where I was standing. She said she understood why I panicked, but that it had really bothered her too. We stood there in the half-painted room not touching, but finally being honest about that specific hurt. Monday morning, my supervisor called me into his office with an HR rep present. They had my performance review printed out with a lot of red marks. I'd missed 3 deadlines, been late to 2 client meetings, and my project quality had dropped significantly. They put me on a formal improvement plan with weekly check-ins and specific targets I had to hit. The HR rep said they understood personal issues happen, but the company needed me functional. I signed the paperwork knowing I was lucky they didn't just fire me. Walking back to my desk felt like everyone was watching, even though they probably weren't. That evening while we were cooking, Ariana's phone buzzed with a text from her dad. She read it out loud because we were trying to be more open with each other. He wrote that no matter what happened between us, the baby would always be his grandchild and always be welcome in their home. It wasn't an apology for all the cruel things they'd said, but it was something. Ariana saved the message, and we kept cooking without talking about it more. 2 nights later, I woke up to Ariana shaking my shoulder at 2 a.m. She was bleeding and scared, and we needed to go to the hospital right now. I threw on clothes while she called her doctor's emergency line. The drive to urgent care felt like forever, even though it was only 10 minutes. She kept saying she couldn't lose the baby. Not now, not after everything. I held her hand at every red light. The waiting room was almost empty, but we still had to wait 40 minutes to be seen. Ariana leaned against me, and we didn't talk about our relationship problems or trust issues or anything, except hoping the baby was okay. The doctor finally called us back and did an ultrasound. The heartbeat was strong and steady on the monitor. The bleeding was from a small tear that would heal on its own with rest. We both cried with relief right there in the exam room. The doctor said this was common and not our fault, but to take it easy for a few days. Driving home at 4 a.m., we were both exhausted but grateful. The scare had shifted something between us, reminding us what actually mattered most right now. When we got home, Ariana said she thought we should try separate bedrooms for a while, not as a punishment, but to give us both space to process everything without the daily friction of sharing a bed. I helped her move some clothes to the guest room, and we set it up with her things. It felt sad watching her arrange her stuff in there, but we both slept better that night having our own spaces. 3 days later, we set up a video call with both sets of parents to explain where we stood. Ariana's parents were on her laptop, mine were on my phone propped against a water glass. We told them we were focusing on being good co-parents, rather than trying to force our romantic relationship to work right now. My mom started crying immediately. Ariana's mom said we were being ridiculous and should try harder. Her dad stayed quiet but looked disappointed. My dad asked practical questions about custody and living arrangements. We stayed calm and repeated that this was what we needed to do. The call ended with everyone unhappy, but at least they knew where we stood. The next afternoon, we got into our first real argument since the separate bedrooms. Ariana thought the baby should learn Italian to connect with her family heritage. I thought that would be confusing, and also worried about what her parents would say when they thought the kid couldn't understand. Then we disagreed about last names because she wanted her name included and I wanted mine. We went back and forth for an hour, getting louder but not mean. Finally, we agreed to table it until after the birth when we'd have to decide for real. It was progress that we could disagree without it destroying us. That Saturday was our first prenatal class at the hospital. We walked in together and found seats in the back corner. Every other couple looked happy and excited, holding hands and rubbing bellies. We sat with space between us, taking notes while the instructor demonstrated breathing techniques. When she had us practice positions for labor, we worked together professionally like co-workers on a project. The normalcy of learning about contractions and pushing while our relationship hung in limbo felt bizarre. During the break, another couple asked how long we'd been together, and we both answered at the same time with different numbers. They looked confused and changed the subject. We stayed for the whole 3-hour class, learning about everything from epidurals to breastfeeding while avoiding eye contact with each other. 2 days later, I came home from work and found a big cardboard box sitting against our apartment door with no note or anything. I picked it up and brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter while Ariana came over to look. She opened the flaps and pulled out a tiny onesie with Italian words printed on it, then a wooden rattle, then a soft blanket her grandmother had made years ago. Her mom had dropped off all these baby things without even knocking or saying anything. We stood there looking at everything spread out on the counter, both of us feeling weird about the gesture since her parents were still being difficult about everything else. I folded the blanket back up while Ariana put the other items in a drawer, neither of us sure if we should text her mom thanks or just leave it alone. The following week, we had an appointment with a mediator downtown to work out our co-parenting agreement. We sat on opposite sides of a conference table while the mediator went through all the decisions we'd need to make about custody schedules and holidays and medical choices. The mediator's timing feels pretty convenient when they're already naturally working through disagreements about Italian lessons and last names without lawyers involved. Makes me wonder if someone suggested this, or if they just decided they needed official help right after managing to argue without destroying each other. She asked about summer breaks, and who would claim the baby on taxes, and what would happen if one of us wanted to move to a different city. We spent 3 hours going through every possible scenario, writing down agreements about pickup times and emergency contacts and how we'd split expenses. The mediator typed everything up while we sat there trying to plan a future we couldn't really picture yet. That night I finished writing the letter to her parents in Italian, explaining our boundaries going forward about respect and how they talk about me. Ariana read through it and made a few edits. Then we printed it out, and she signed her name next to mine at the bottom. The Italian came easily now that I wasn't pretending anymore, and I used formal language to make it clear we were serious about these rules. We mailed it the next morning on the way to our separate jobs. Her parents called Ariana that afternoon, but she let it go to voicemail, and we listened to her mom's confused message together that evening. 4 4 days later, we tried having dinner at her parents' house to see if they could follow the new boundaries we'd set. Her mom cooked way too much food like always, and her dad poured wine even though Ariana couldn't drink. They mostly stuck to English, but her mom slipped twice, once commenting on my shirt, and once asking her dad something about my car. Both times I answered immediately in Italian, reminding them about our agreement, and they looked surprised, but stopped. Her dad even asked me about work in English, actually listening to my answer about the new project I was managing. We left after 2 hours, exhausted but calling it progress since nobody had yelled or stormed out. Back at work, I started getting my focus back and meeting my deadlines again. My supervisor noticed the improvement and mentioned it during our weekly check-in, saying I seemed more settled. I stayed late a few nights to catch up on the backlog from my worst weeks, organizing files and finishing reports I'd been putting off. The performance improvement plan was still in place, but I wasn't worried about losing my job anymore. My coworkers stopped giving me concerned looks when I passed their desks. That weekend, Ariana and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding about whether we actually still loved each other or if we were just going through the motions for the baby. We sat on opposite ends of the couch after dinner, both of us picking at loose threads on the cushions while we talked. She said she still loved me, but didn't know if she could ever fully trust me again after 2 years of lies. I told her I loved her too, but understood if trust was impossible after what I'd done and what she'd done. We agreed love wasn't enough by itself, and trust would take way longer to rebuild if it ever came back at all. Neither of us cried, but we both looked tired when we went to our separate rooms. A few nights later, we worked on setting up the nursery together, moving the crib from the box to the corner and hanging the mobile her cousin had sent. She found an Italian kids show on her tablet and let it play while we organized tiny clothes in the dresser drawers. The characters sang songs about colors and numbers while we worked, and neither of us pretended not to understand anymore. I caught myself humming along to one of the songs while arranging diapers on the changing table, and Ariana actually smiled a little. We worked for 2 hours without talking much, just passing each other tools and holding things steady, finding a rhythm that felt peaceful even if it wasn't romantic. Her parents sent a text that night about the next prenatal appointment, writing in Italian like they always did with Ariana. I picked up my phone and typed back in Italian, confirming the date and time while Ariana watched from across the room. Her dad responded with a thumbs up emoji, and her mom sent a heart, both of them accepting my response without comment. We weren't together exactly, but we weren't completely apart either, just finding some new way to be a family that nobody had a name for yet. Well, I've really got to wonder what's actually going on with this whole not together, but not apart thing they keep mentioning. Kinda makes you think, right? Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. See you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.